Adobe announced Lightroom Classic CC, which is an update to Lightroom 6 and Lightroom CC that you've been using. I love it. It has a lot of great new features, so we're going to go over them. If you're wondering what the difference between Lightroom Classic CC and Lightroom CC is, check our other video at that link. First up, the big difference, Lightroom Classic CC is subscription only. You can no longer buy a persistent license for it, which means you can't just pay for it outright. You have to pay on a monthly or yearly basis. So if you want it, you have to go to sdp.io/Adobe deal to get it. But I've been recommending people do this for years now. It's okay. I know it hurts you to have to pay monthly for something, but it works out better, and it comes with Adobe Photoshop, so you're actually getting a pretty good deal. We have a book on Lightroom Classic CC at sdp.io/LRC. You can get it right now. First up, the catalog has a new format. So if you've been using Lightroom 6 or Lightroom CC, the first time you launch Lightroom Classic CC, it will import that catalog for you. The biggest difference is that they've decided to compress all your little changes and the metadata, mostly in order to improve performance. Now, it won't touch your old catalog, so that's going to stay intact, and you can still run your other older version of Lightroom with your older catalog. So everything should be fine. But once you get the new catalog updated with all your old files and changes, you can safely delete the old catalog. And from that point forward, you shouldn't notice any difference except better performance. And the performance changes are pretty huge. The biggest difference you're going to see is when you're importing pictures and rendering previews. Our workflow is to import pictures from a memory card and at the same time have it render both smart previews and one-to-one previews so that when we call, we can zoom in one-to-one to check the critical focus and sharpness of each individual image so that we can select the sharpest picture out of them. The performance of that, depending on the computer I tested it on, improved from about 45% to about 85%. So much, much faster. Computers with more cores seem to benefit more. The 45% comes from a 4-core computer, and the 85% figure came from an 8-core computer. One of our biggest complaints about the previous version of Lightroom is that it wasn't using all your cores. They were just sitting there doing nothing. Cores are like little processors in your computer. So now it's doing a lot more. As far as culling goes, flipping from one picture to another, I tested it at about 15% faster. That includes working both the library module and the develop module. So it's a little faster on every computer that we tested. They said that they've used the GPU to improve performance further. I tested it with both the GPU turned on and the GPU turned off, and I did not notice, I could not measure any performance differences, but that's very specific to the types of tests that I was doing. I was testing importing and culling and the things that I find to be slow in the old version of Lightroom. So the GPU, I know, will improve your performance if you're making 20 changes with an adjustment brush and then flipping back and forth. It's going to speed that up. It's just that that was never a problem for me before. So this is important to know because Adobe's telling you that the GPU will help performance. I didn't find that it helped that much. Therefore, you can save yourself a few bucks and not buy the newest, greatest graphics card because it's not going to appreciably improve your performance according to our testing. Another performance benefit is that Lightroom now lets you cull pictures using the embedded previews. And if you've ever used Photo Mechanic, a separate tool, you'll know exactly what this is. Photo Mechanic is a tool that just allows you to cull pictures, cull raw images based on the JPEGs that are embedded in them. Now they've taken that capability and built it right into Lightroom, so you won't need to jump out to a separate app. Sorry, Photo Mechanic guys. This is an option. When you go to import, you'll see the option to select embedded and sidecar previews instead of one-to-one previews. I'll just show you what that looks like over here. File, import photos and video. And you can see this, embedded and sidecar. So normally I render one-to-one previews to make everything faster. If you render embedded and sidecar instead, it basically will just use the JPEG preview that your camera embedded in the RAW file. Every time you take a RAW file, the camera also renders a JPEG and kind of sticks it into that RAW file where it generally gets forgotten. Lightroom is using that instead of generating its own preview. To show you the workflow, I'll import some RAW files really quickly. Let's select embedded and sidecar here and then click import. And what you're going to see is that these pictures are going to start to pop up right away without any huge delay. Here's Papa Jose. Look, it says embedded preview right here. That means that it's not the preview that Adobe has generated. It is whatever my camera generated. If I zoom in here, you can see it's a little blurry. That's because the embedded preview is not the full resolution of your camera. Generally, your camera sticks in a small preview. I waited long enough, that embedded preview marking went away, and then it showed me the full resolution file. If I jump back into the grid view, you can see the little double arrow in the upper left corner of these. That means that these are based on the embedded preview and not the raw file itself. This picture has been rendered since I viewed it 1:1. There's another option that's related to this, and if you go to Edit and Preferences, over here in the General tab, this last option, replace embedded previews with standard previews during idle time. I suggest just turning that on and leaving it on. It should be on by default. What this will do is Lightroom will let you get started with your culling by showing you the embedded previews, but then when you're not using Lightroom, it's going to go back and generate its own previews. My suggestion, render 1:1 previews when you can step away from your computer and let Lightroom completely render the 1:1 previews for everything. I like 1:1 previews because you can zoom in 100% without waiting, and I am frequently going through multiple pictures and going and picking the sharpest one. If you're zooming in a lot during your workflow, render the 1:1 previews and then choose to wait. If you're just excited about your pictures and you want to get to culling right away, then choose the embedded previews. That's the fastest way to get started. With that option selected, Lightroom will, in the background, go back and render standard previews that are not based on your camera's JPEG. Another new feature is color range masking. This I find to be super useful. So let's get back into Lightroom here. I'll show you what I'm talking about by changing this guy's shirt color. I'm using an adjustment brush here and I'm going to just select it. Let's show the selected mask overlay here. So everything it's showing in red is what my brush has selected. And you can see with my just really kind of sloppy selection here, it's not perfect. Like it's selected part of her shirt, it's selected part of her hair, it's selected part of his neck here. So that's not great. If you go in here to range mask and you select color, there's now a dropper here that lets me pick a particular color. So what I'm going to do is set that to the color of his shirt. And right away you could see it deselected her hair, it deselected his skin. Now it didn't deselect all of her shirt there. So it's not perfect. Her shirt is a little bit of the same tone as his shirt. I have some control over just how much it selects. I can change this here to select, make it a little tighter or make it a little looser. What I could do here is tighten it up enough that her shirt isn't caught. And then with my dropper here, I could go in and hold down the Shift key and then add some more colors to the selection. So if you've used color selecting in Photoshop, it's going to work a lot like that. Now I still might need to go back and hold down the Alt key and deselect a few things, like deselecting part of her shirt here, just to make it perfect. And then we can just tweak this a little bit more. So now I'll turn off the mask overlay and let's just turn his shirt to white. I'll just desaturate it and increase the exposure some. Ta-da, that's what the color range masking does. It means that for simple things like that, you won't have to make the round trip to Photoshop and back. It's still not as powerful as a tool in Photoshop. One of the differences is still that Photoshop has more powerful selection tools. But for a lot of us, that's going to be good enough to get our selections done in Lightroom. Very closely related tool is the luminance range masking. Let's jump back into Lightroom here and let's pick a picture with a ton of dynamic range in it. Go into our develop module. And you can see the sky here is very bright. This is very dark. So what we could do is we could use our mask here and let's show the mask overlay and kind of select these bright areas so that we could bring them down. Let's turn off the auto mask. Won't need that. And let's get the sky up here while we're at it. And you can see so much of photo editing is just trying to be fast about it, not spend all your time. You want to get back out and shooting and not spend all day on your computer. So I'm being really sloppy here. I know I could be more careful. Now, what we can do with the range mask is select luminance. And what this is going to do is show me a luminance range with 0 over here from being complete black to 100 being complete white. And I can use this to adjust the luminance range. So as I pull it up, you can see the selection is disappearing from the darker rock, but it's remaining on the brighter background. So with that done, I can kind of bring the exposure down here. Now that we have selected it, I'll turn off the selected mask overlay. I can bring down the exposure and really just change the background. Maybe we need a little dehaze to add some pop to it. Not that much pop, a little clarity. Lower the black point a little bit. So you can see with that, I was able to just really quickly go in and make these changes without needing to worry about tight masking. Even as I'm touching it up here, the luminance range mask is still active. So it's still masking off my selections. And if we do a quick side by side, you can see I made a pretty dramatic and fairly natural change in just a matter of moments. And that's what I love about this new feature. It's going to let me do more without having to make that round trip into Photoshop. So thanks for adding that. Adobe also added bigger standard previews. Now, when you're importing pictures, I showed you earlier, you could pick the embedded, the one-to-one, or the standard previews. By default, Lightroom will render standard previews at the width of your monitor. So if you're looking at pictures with the full or fit mode where it fills the entire screen, it will not have to go and render a new preview for you. But those standard previews were limited to 2,000 pixels wide. Why? Because when Adobe made the last version of the software, 2,000 pixels seemed like wider than any monitor could ever possibly be. But now monitors are 4K monitors. So if we do edit catalog settings on the file handling tab, you'll see standard preview size. Auto is set to 3,840 pixels. Previously, the maximum would have been 2,048 pixels because this is 4K. 4K is 3,840 pixels wide. Therefore, if you're using a high resolution monitor and standard previews, this means that the previews will just go better and faster because it won't always have to render the new previews. You also have a very niche option that exports all your metadata except for your camera settings. I know the option is called export only camera settings, but it's really export everything but the camera settings. And no, smart aleck, I did not specifically request this feature. I am happy to share my settings. But if you go to File and Export, here is where it is. Go down here to pick an image format of JPEG, and then the metadata. Here's the option, all except camera raw info. These other options were here before. It's just this one option is new, and I wanted to tell you about it. It's not a big deal. Lightroom Classic CC is subscription only. You cannot buy it outright. You can only get it at sdp.io/Adobe Deal. Hope that was helpful. Thanks for watching.